The title is the topic. Today I'm going to review the feminist frequency video Ms. Male Character.
In this episode, we're going to shift the discussion away from plot devices to focus on a pattern in character design and conceptualization, which I've decided to call the Ms. Male Character.
She said which I've decided to call, which means she can name it, describe it, and define whether it is right or wrong, and educate you as to whether it is harmful or not. Just to show you how this game works, I'm going to play along with my rules, where I create my own trope using Anita's arguments.
To focus on a pattern in character design and conceptualization, which I've decided to call the Ms. Male Character.
I want to focus on a pattern in character design and conceptualization, which I've decided to call the Mr. Male Character.
I describe the Ms. Male Character trope as a female version of an already established or default male character.
I describe the Mr. Male Character trope as a male version of an already established or default male character.
Ms. Male characters are defined primarily by their relationship to their male counterparts, via their visual properties, their narrative connection, or occasionally through promotional materials.
The Mr. Male characters are defined primarily by their relationship to their male counterparts, via their visual properties, their narrative connections, or occasionally through promotional materials. The Ms. Male Character video was published on November 18, 2013. That is over 1 year after her Kickstarter ended, and almost 1 year after all her videos were supposed to be finished. All we get is a trope she identified herself, which if you go by her textbook description, can in large part be applied to Luigi.
Studied extensively.
On top of that, unlike the Damsel in Distress series, I don't see any catalog of games for this trope. Why catalog the Damsel in Distress, but not the Ms. Male characters? Does it mean this isn't a big issue? Is it worth documenting damsels? Or is it that your research just got lazier as time went on?
Studied extensively.
It's like you do the bare minimum to convince us how big or bad these issues are. It's like all you did was spend over a year thinking about how to convince us with arguments rather than evidence.
Let's begin our examination of this trope by traveling back in time to 1980 and the creation of one of the most famous characters in the history of gaming. Initially called Pac-Man in Japan, the name was later changed to Pac-Man when the game hit arcades in the United States.
Facts are fine. I have no issue with this.
Incidentally, Toru Iwatani, the creator of Pac-Man, has stated in numerous interviews that the game was designed to appeal to women because, and I'm not kidding about this, he said, "When you think about things women like, you think about fashion, or fortune-telling, or food, or dating boyfriends. So I decided to theme the game around eating. After eating dinner, women like to have dessert."
You criticize his thought process on how to make a game that appeals to women, and then you play this later on.
Hi, I'm Lily Tomlin. I'm a Pac-Man freak. It's all right. I can talk about it now. Of course, there was a time when I couldn't.
A girl who says she's a Pac-Man freak. If your research wasn't so lazy, you would have thought that one through ahead of time.
Luckily, Iwatani's regressive personal or cultural notions about women are not reflected in the finished game itself.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
Pac-Man went on to become an international sensation and remains one of the most recognizable pop culture icons today.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
But probably not because women are genetically predisposed to like eating desserts more than humans of other genders.
This is coming from a feminist who wants to begin a new video series examining the representations of men and masculinity in video games. You did say Toru Iwatani's notion about women are not reflected in the game itself.
Luckily, Iwatani's regressive personal or cultural notions about women are not reflected in the finished game itself.
Yet you are still boo-hooing on Twitter about how developers are still using the damsel in distress in games. Dying Light has a damsel in distress storyline. Dear game developers, it's 2015. Aren't you embarrassed by this yet? It has been over 1 year since you finished your damsel in distress videos, and even though you said that the damsel in distress is not completely off limits when it comes to gaming...
Just to be clear, I'm not saying that all games that use the damsel in distress as a plot device are automatically sexist or have no value. Of course, there is absolutely nothing wrong with offering or occasionally needing assistance.
You are still complaining. You are the one with regressive notions, as you lack the ability to admit when you are wrong and your research is lazy.
Studied extensively. The next year, a group of MIT students created a mod for the original Pac-Man arcade cabinets called Crazy Otto, which featured 4 new mazes and a new male hero with little legs. The idea was to sell this enhancement kit to arcade owners so they could breathe new life into older Pac-Man machines. But because of a separate lawsuit settlement with Atari, they decided to try and sell Crazy Otto directly to Midway, the US manufacturer of Pac-Man cabinets.
Not a whole lot to say about that section.
As luck would have it, Midway was anxious for a follow-up to Pac-Man and worked to transform the mod into an official sequel.
An official sequel? And what did they decide to do?
In an effort to continue appealing to female gamers, Crazy Otto was briefly changed to Pac-Woman, then to Miss Pac-Man, before finally becoming Ms. Pac-Man.
They decided to make a female character instead of a male character, because they wanted games that appeal to female gamers.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
In your own videos, you are telling us that in the early days of video games, developers went out of their way to make female characters and tried to appeal to a female audience.
Before finally becoming Ms. Pac-Man. An 11th hour move designed to avoid potential backlash for the third cutscene, which features a child born out of wedlock.
I wonder where I've seen backlash against developers who decided to do what they want with their time and their money.
The game hit arcades in the United States in 1982 and was an immediate smash hit,
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
becoming the most successful American-made, coin-operated arcade cabinet ever produced.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
Like her predecessor, Ms. Pac-Man quickly achieved widespread cultural prominence, and it wasn't long before she was turned into a special marshmallow and added to Pac-Man's cereal.
It sounds to me like despite all your criticisms of the Ms. Male character trope, society was very accepting of Miss Pac-Man despite her being a female version of the original. If you, as a pop culture critic, cannot accept what society deems acceptable, who has the problem? The game developers or you?
Ms. Pac-Man was not only one of the first playable female characters, but she also holds the distinction of being the original Ms. Male character in video games.
Guess I should start a Kickstarter to talk about the Mr. Male character trope. After all, these tropes are so harmful that we must raise awareness so others may not be impacted by them in a harmful way. I still haven't fully recovered from my experience with playing Luigi as a kid.
This trope is of course part of a long tradition in visual storytelling. The process of creating Ms. Male characters out of pre-existing male heroes has been especially popular in animation and comic books over the past century. When the female spin-off is an exact duplicate, she is sometimes referred to as a distaff counterpart.
What if they had a pre-existing male comic book character and made a Mr. Male character based on him? Wouldn't it just be bizarre if such a thing existed?
Even though the Ms. Male character did not originate with video games, developers have made generous and frequent use of the trope over the years, especially in games marketed towards young people and general audiences.
I recall playing a lot of Mr. Male characters as a kid. I feel this trope has been used for far too long in video games. Being forced to play as the second player, where someone else gets to play the first player, reinforces a regressive notion that someone is always first and someone else is always second. To resolve this issue, I propose they re-release the original Nintendo with a few alterations. First, they should redesign it so both controllers can plug into the first player slot. Second, they should re-release every Nintendo game where all the Mr. Male characters share the same color palette as their counterparts.
Let's explore this trope in a little more depth by asking a simple question. How do we know what gender a particular character is? Other than their names, how do we know that the collection of pixels on the right signal male, while those on the left indicate female? Well, in order to differentiate Ms. Pac-Man from her already world-famous counterpart, her creators added a series of stereotypical design elements. With only a few pixels to work with, designers built on top of the original Pac-Man template, adding a red bow, red lipstick, an eye with makeup, long lashes, and a mole as beauty mark.
Why do you wear makeup in real life if you think reinforcing this stereotype of women is so harmful? You also said they had only a few pixels to work with.
With only a few pixels to work with,
what would have been a better solution? You do realize that game developers do this to female characters.
because it's a reflection of our society.
If you want game developers to stop portraying women this way, you need to tell women to stop wearing makeup, and you need to start with yourself.
Even though Ms. Pac-Man is essentially a personified shape, in promotional materials she's presented in high heels with long legs, jewelry, and sometimes a feather boa.
Why should you be allowed these choices, but not developers? No one is telling you not to wear makeup and big hoop earrings. We are telling you it is hypocritical to do so while shaming developers for doing the same thing.
The design elements that were used to transform Pac-Man into Ms. Pac-Man are referred to as feminizing gendered signifiers. The bow, the makeup, the long eyelashes are all specific stylistic choices.
Then why are you trying to change games instead of the women in the real world that influence the image of women in games? You are nothing but a straw feminist.
They're all part of our culture's visual vocabulary, intended to convey information about gender to the viewer. Game designers use these stereotypical attributes as a sort of shorthand to quickly identify a given character as female.
You just said when they started doing it, they had very few pixels to work with.
With only a few pixels to work with,
Did it occur to you they wanted to differentiate between Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man, and that was one of the only solutions?
childlike hair decorations are by far the most frequent accessory used for this purpose. It's standard practice for creators to just put a bow on top of anthropomorphized animals or personified objects in order to communicate that a character is not male.
So gender signifiers like bows. There is one other signifier you mentioned in this video. That is the color pink.
The color coding of characters is another frequently used visual element to signify gender. Typically, the dominant color used in the design of the female variant is bright pink, although sometimes a purple or pastel palette may be used.
You even say yourself in a few minutes that gender signifiers are not mandatory for this trope to be in effect.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
I am going to take a clip from Damsel in Distress Part 1 and reinforce what I'm talking about when Anita likes to set the rules for what we do and don't talk about.
Let's take a quick moment to clear up some common misconceptions about this trope. The Ms. Male character trope is often grouped with other separate tropes, including childlike hair decoration and this bright pink, although sometimes a purple or pastel palette may be used. However, it's important to remember that these associated conventions are not necessarily a part of the Ms. Male character trope itself.
When it comes to the damsel in distress, she wanted to separate it from these other tropes,
Including the designated victim, the heroic rescue, and the smooch of victory.
When it comes to the Ms. Male character, she wants to spend a great deal of time talking about the color pink and gender signifiers like bows, even though she classified it as not being a requirement to fulfill the Ms. Male character trope.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
She did say this at the beginning, though.
In this episode, we're going to shift the discussion away from plot devices to focus on a pattern in character design and conceptualization, which I've decided to call the Ms. Male character.
So with the damsel in distress, it was a plot device, but with the Ms. Male character, it is a pattern of character design. However, she also said gender signifiers are not mandatory.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
In other words, she will always try to set up the rules to favor her arguments and set up scenarios where you can't counter her arguments if you play by her rules.
Studied extensively.
And that is why it took over 1 year to make 4 videos. $158,000 well spent, assuming any of it was spent on something other than lazy research.
Now, the interesting thing is that these gendered signifiers are really quite arbitrary and abstract. There's nothing about a bow in and of itself that's intrinsically or essentially feminine. Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect. It's just a piece of colored fabric, after all. But our society currently assigns a very specific, socially constructed, and strictly enforced meaning to that piece of fabric. Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect. It's a symbol that conveys the concept of female, and invokes the idea of girlhood. Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
So then why is she dedicating so much time to gender signifiers like bows and the color pink? Do you see how ridiculous this is when you think about the big picture?
In the 1985 NES classic Ice Climber, player 1 controls Popo, who wears a blue parka. If you have a second player, they can control Nana, who wears a pink parka.
I guess it is a good thing they didn't put a bow on that character.
This is a classic example of put a bow on it.
And I guess it's a good thing not all Ms. Male characters are colored pink.
The characters are essentially identical both mechanically and aesthetically, except for a very minor difference in their breastplate styles. So far, so good.
But if they either have pink or a bow, even if not both at the same time, it is all of a sudden an issue.
But all the female heirs also have a strangely conspicuous and completely unnecessary lavender-colored bow on top of their armor. If you have a second player, they can control Nana, who wears a pink parka.
Even when she does find characters that don't have bows or aren't colored pink, she will still complain if they have at least one of those attributes.
Studied extensively.
All you do is point out every detail you personally don't like.
And in Runner 2, she is suddenly and conspicuously busty.
And she follows that up with this.
The most commonly used gendered signifiers, or feminizing accessories, are bows, lipstick, long eyelashes, and the color pink. Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect, but there are a whole host of other design elements that, in combination, serve the same purpose. Other signifiers used to differentiate women from men are pigtails, high-heeled shoes, painted nails, pronounced makeup, especially blush and eyeshadow, midriff-bearing outfits, exaggerated breasts with exposed cleavage, and a heart motif in their design or powers.
So then why do you wear makeup and earrings? Why are you trying to educate developers not to use these signifiers on women when you are a woman who wears them in real life?
Pretty Bomber is the protagonist's adversary and sometimes love interest in the Bomberman series. And just to make absolutely clear, there is no confusion about her gender. She's decked out in pink, has a giant heart attached to her head, and also throws heart-shaped bombs.
You just showed games where the color pink and the bow were used on their own.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect, but these types of stereotypical attributes do serve to mark female characters as decidedly different by virtue of their feminine presentation.
When they are used in isolation, you are complaining, just to turn around a few minutes later and say there is nothing wrong when they are used in isolation.
Now, just to be clear, there's no inherent problem with the color pink, makeup, bows, or high heels as design elements on their own.
Bulletproof arguments that are full of holes. Rock-solid arguments that are crumbling.
And of course, people of all genders may choose to wear any of them from time to time in the real world, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that either.
Just like you choose to wear earrings, shirts with those colors, and makeup while explaining how developers should not have the same choices that you allow for yourself.
However, when designers choose to use the Ms. Male character trope and its associated visual stereotypes,
Associated visual stereotypes?
gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
Why are you doing this?
However, when designers choose to use the Ms. Male character trope and its associated visual stereotypes, gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
Was it worth putting a year into your project to come up with this?
However, when designers choose to use the Ms. Male character trope and its associated visual stereotypes to specifically distinguish female characters from the rest of the cast in a fictional context, it has a few negative consequences.
I can't wait to see what these consequences are.
One repercussion of constantly relying on feminizing signifiers for character design is that it tends to reinforce a strict binary form of gender expression. The gender binary is an entirely artificial and socially constructed division of male and female into two distinctly separate and opposing classes of human being. The gender binary also erases the continuum of gender presentations and identities that fall outside of the rigid masculine-feminine false dichotomy.
If this binary is based on a real-world social construct, it is because
It's a reflection of our society. And within that strict binary, women are marked, while men get to remain largely unmarked.
you are marking yourself. You do this everywhere you go. In almost all your videos, you wear earrings. If you want this to change, you need to tell others to stop doing it in the real world, and you need to start with yourself.
In the Mario franchise, the Koopalings were originally described as Bowser's 7 children. All of them are male except for one named Wendy O. Koopa. We know she's female because her designers use practically every hyper-feminine frill and accessory available to separate her from her male siblings.
Hyper-feminine accessories. I want everyone to keep that on your mind.
Wendy's 6 brothers, by contrast, are unmarked by gendered identifiers, which means they get to be presented in a variety of creative ways. Ludwig's design communicates intelligence and arrogance, while Lemmy's reveals his playfulness, and Iggy's makes him seem maniacal and a little unbalanced.
Their design is intended to convey a personality trait.
Sadly, Wendy's identity is limited by the fact that she's covered in superficial gendered signifiers. One look at her and you know she's female, but not much else. As with many Ms. Male characters, her defining characteristic is her gender.
So when it comes to the men, they were designed that way to convey a personality trait, but with Wendy, it is just to convey she is female.
Wendy also suffers from a parallel condition I like to call personality female syndrome.
A parallel condition.
Let's take a quick moment to clear up some common misconceptions about this trope. The Ms. Male character trope is often grouped with other separate tropes, including the personality female syndrome, wherein female characters are reduced to a one-dimensional personality type consisting of nothing more than a collection of shallow stereotypes about women.
You said with the men it conveyed a personality trait, just to show us a character that has a personality trait conveyed by the way she is portrayed. And with Iggy, you said he seemed unbalanced.
And Iggy's makes him seem maniacal and a little unbalanced.
Why is it okay to portray men with negative portrayals, but not women?
She's vain, spoiled, bratty, and quick to anger.
I don't care! I want America for my birthday! I want it, I want it, I want it!
In other words, the design of the character conveys she is vain and spoiled, which is not okay. But with Iggy, it's okay his design conveys he's maniacal and unbalanced.
And Iggy's makes him seem maniacal and a little unbalanced. When female characters are marked by obligatory stereotypical identifiers, it actively limits the range of available options by enforcing a narrow, restrictive, and monolithic model for the portrayal of femininity.
Why is it we should take into more consideration how women are portrayed in games instead of men? Why does that matter? If Miss Pac-Man is supposed to eat dots, why does it matter outside of identifying her as a female? And she is just a round ball that eats dots. There isn't really much to work with there.
Meanwhile, since male characters are allowed to be unmarked, it permits a much wider array of possibilities for their designs.
You just said that these marks don't exist in all games with the Ms. Male character trope.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
Even if we go off your statement that the marks limit the design, it doesn't exist in all Ms. Male characters. And even given that, you have yet to prove these gender signifiers are harmful to the players. You are not a moral authority, you are just a pop culture critic.
I should note that even though pink and purple are strong gendered indicators when combined with other feminizing visual markers, those colors are not the exclusive domain of women.
So it exists on male characters as well?
An expanded color palette is something we do see applied to men on rare occasions, as with Kirby, Bomberman, or Roy Koopa, but they are the exception to the rule and are typically only found in colorful, childlike, and extremely male-dominated worlds.
Almost all Ms. Male characters you show in this video that are pink and have gender signifiers are limited to childlike games. You just defined it as an issue for men in a scenario where you demonstrate it to only be a serious issue with women in similar games.
Studied extensively, but if a bow, lipstick, eyeshadow, or heels are placed on an otherwise male-identified character, the intention, or at least the result, is typically a homophobic or transphobic joke.
Whether it is a joke or not would be determined by the designer's intent.
There are a few optional design accessories for men like neckties or baseball caps, but they don't hold the same significance. They're not ubiquitous or strictly enforced, and they're never really used to mark men as not female in larger fictional universes dominated by women.
I guess it's a good thing you said gender signifiers are not strictly enforced with the Ms. Male character.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
I'll sum up the Scribblenauts section with this.
In the game, we learn that Lily is one of 42 children. All 41 of the other siblings are male, and all have some trait or interest associated with their name that serves to define their personality.
Anita is focusing on this game to try and draw more sympathy, but it also leads into this.
In addition to being a Ms. Male character, Lily is also a particularly pronounced example of another related trope called the Smurfette principle.
How is it related? These are separate tropes. You have a Smurfette video already.
Let's take a quick moment to clear up some common misconceptions about this trope. The Ms. Male character trope is often grouped with other separate tropes, including the Smurfette principle.
Why do you keep combining different tropes?
The term was coined back in 1991 by feminist author Katha Pollitt, and is of course named after the only female Smurf in Smurfville. The Smurfette principle is the tendency for a piece of media to include only one woman in an ensemble of male characters.
Why are you talking about this in the Ms. Male character video?
The trope is a pervasive problem in video games, manifesting as the token chick in any given grouping of heroes, villains, or non-playable characters. An exceptionally stark example of the trope can be found in the original Mega Man series. Over the course of 10 games, there are 78 bosses or robot masters, and exactly one of them is female, Splash Woman, who appears in the 9th game.
Should we be upset that all the scouts in Sailor Moon are female?
In the Wii U game The Wonderful 101, 6 of the 7 color-coded playable heroes are men. The one exception is, of course, the pink hero named Wonder Pink. In addition to her Smurfette status, she's also afflicted with personality female syndrome.
I got in late last night, but there was this party, and then the after party, and then the after party. I needed a major powder break to freshen up before meeting you guys.
Wonder Pink is shallow, vain, materialistic, and flies into a rage at the drop of a hat.
So we have 2 game characters with personality female syndrome. Wendy Koopa and Wonder Pink.
This project will examine the tropes, plot devices, and patterns most commonly associated with women in gaming from a systemic, big-picture perspective.
Cool story, bro. Cool story.
You can find Smurfettes in just about every genre, from dungeon crawlers to racing games, from RPGs to shooters.
Is it a big-picture systemic issue? Just because it is in almost every genre does not mean it is big-picture or systemic.
Paulette sums up the crux of the Smurfette problem nicely in her New York Times article. The message is clear. Boys are the norm, girls the variation. Boys are central, girls peripheral. Boys are individuals, girls types. Boys define the group, its story, and its code of values. Girls exist only in relation to boys.
I guess you didn't watch enough television growing up, as the reverse can exist in shows that are female dominant as well.
With that in mind, let's come back to Ms. Pac-Man for a moment. One of the core consequences of the Ms. Male character trope is that it helps to define women by their connection to men.
Notice how she just said with that in mind?
With that in mind,
She just drew more sympathy with the Smurfette principal section so she could go back to Pac-Man and pick on Miss Pac-Man some more. Princess Peach was the flagship damsel in distress.
Princess Peach is in many ways the quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress.
And Miss Pac-Man is the flagship Miss Male character.
Ms. Pac-Man was not only one of the first playable female characters, but she also holds the distinction of being the original Ms. Male character in video games.
She started the Damsel in Distress series with Princess Peach asking for help.
Mario! Help!
She started the Ms. Male character video with Miss Pac-Man dancing around wearing gender signifiers.
Honey, don't you know I'm more than Pac-Man with a bow?
Don't you see the pattern? Establish the flagship character and do everything you can possibly do to destroy their image. She did it with Princess Peach, and now she is doing it with Miss Pac-Man. She is doing it the same way.
Studied extensively, so despite her tagline, more than Pac-Man with a bow,
Honey, don't you know I'm more than Pac-Man with a bow?
Ms. Pac-Man's visual properties are simply an extension of Pac-Man's original design. She actually kind of is just Pac-Man with a bow.
And no one seemed to care back then.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
Maybe if you'd learn to enjoy the games rather than nitpick insignificant stuff you defined as not part of the trope itself,
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
then you could finish your videos. You are wasting time and money.
Her simple narrative reinforces the fact that she really only exists in relationship to Pac-Man. She's both his love interest and also the mother of his child.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
Dixie Kong is the female variant and love interest of Diddy Kong. Note the ponytail and hair ringlets, pink shirt, pink hat, earrings, and eyelashes, all to distinguish her from her predecessor.
Why do you reinforce the narrative if you want it to disappear?
Essentially, Ms. Male characters are feminized imitations or derivative copies of already established male characters. They exist only because of and in relationship to their male counterparts.
So what? If a developer wants to add a female variant that is widely successful,
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
and you devote an entire video to it, then you are the one defining it as an issue. You have the problem, not the developers.
Ms. Male characters typically aren't given their own distinctive identities and are prevented from being fully realized characters who exist on their own terms.
Remember how I said the characteristics for the Ms. Male character can be applied to the Mr. Male character? Watch Anita describe what in essence amounts to Luigi.
This has the perhaps unintended effect of devaluing these characters and often relegating them to subordinate or secondary status inside their respective media franchises, even when they are on rare occasion given a starring role in a spin-off or sequel.
You just defined an issue that can happen to Mr. Male characters as well.
Studied extensively. In a male-identified society like ours, men are associated and become synonymous with human beings in general. In other words, male tends to be seen as the default for the entire species.
Why is it an issue for men to make male the default in their games, but it is okay for you to make female the default in your hypothetical game concept?
Let's try a thought experiment to see if we can create a hypothetical game concept of our own.
Like many fairy tales, this story begins once upon a time with the kidnapping of a princess.
In video games, male identification manifests as a tendency for all characters to be male by default, unless there's some special reason or specific justification for women to be present in the story.
You already said developers started pushing for more female representation in games from the beginning.
In an effort to continue appealing to female gamers, Crazy Otto was briefly changed to Pac-Woman, then to Miss Pac-Man, before finally becoming Ms. Pac-Man.
I understand it is a male-dominant industry, but you don't give developers enough credit for what they do. And all you can do is criticize them if they don't get it just right. Why should any developer ever make a female representation when a pop culture critic will raise $158,000 and make a series of videos criticizing them for not getting it just right? Why do women have to be these perfect angels in games? Why is it okay for men to suffer the Mr. Male character trope, but not women to suffer the Ms. Male character trope?
To help illustrate one of the ways the male as default phenomenon operates in gaming worlds, let's take a look at the mobile mega hit Angry Birds.
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
When the game was first released in 2009, the 5 original birds in the flock were identified by their color and did not include any specific gendered signifiers. Over time, as the game has grown in popularity and the brand has expanded to include numerous spin-offs, real-world merchandise, and a weekly cartoon series,
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
the birds have been given more distinct personalities and actual names.
This sounds like a good thing. They didn't have to gender the birds, they chose to.
Mobile developer Rovio first began gendering birds in February 2011 with the release of their Valentine's-themed episode for Angry Birds Seasons, which includes Ms. Male character versions of the red bird, the white bird, and a female pig as love interests. Note the bows, makeup, and long eyelashes.
If you stop reinforcing the narrative yourself, then developers might stop doing it. If you are going to continue wearing makeup and earrings, then why shouldn't developers have the same choice with their characters?
There's a larger unintended consequence to marking these birds as female with feminizing gendered signifiers. It reinforces that all the other birds and pigs without these specific visual cues are all male by default unless otherwise noted.
Then stop reinforcing the narrative yourself.
The addition of the pink bird to the main flock in 2012 further entrenched male as the default setting for the Angry Birds universe.
Male was always the default for Angry Birds. You said that yourself.
To help illustrate one of the ways the male as default phenomenon operates in gaming worlds, let's take a look at the mobile mega hit Angry Birds. The addition of the pink bird to the main flock in 2012 further entrenched male as the default setting for the Angry Birds universe.
How can it further entrench male as the default when that is how it was from the beginning?
Studied extensively. I should mention that Rovio later stated that the white bird was also female and named her Matilda. This revelation led to a character redesign which has feminized the white bird by adding pink accents, rose cheeks, and long eyelashes in the Angry Birds cartoon series, just to make absolutely clear that she is female.
Now I'm starting to get confused. Are these Ms. Male characters? The white bird looks nothing like the others. Why are you even talking about Angry Birds?
In video games, male identification manifests as a tendency for all characters to be male by default, unless there's some special reason or specific justification for women to be present in the story.
That's right, to illustrate how male is oftentimes the default. The male may be the default with the Ms. Male character, but then again, Miss Pac-Man had her own game.
Ms. Pac-Man was not only one of the first playable female characters, but she also holds the distinction of being the original Ms. Male character in video games.
Your flagship Ms. Male character was based off the male counterpart, but she was first playable in her own game.
Over in the Mushroom Kingdom, we have Toadette, who is both a Ms. Male character and the only woman among the Mushroom People.
I'm tempted to say our princess is in another castle, but I rescued her when I reviewed your Damsel in Distress videos.
Her introduction to the Mario spin-off games emphasizes the fact that all the other Toads in the entire species are male.
So when we talk about Princess Peach, we can't talk about spin-offs because they fall outside the core franchise.
Peach does of course appear in many spin-offs such as the Mario Party, Mario Sports, and Mario Kart series, as well as the Super Smash Bros. Nintendo Universe crossover fighting games. However, all of these spin-offs fall well outside of the core Super Mario series of platformers.
But when it comes to Toads in the Ms. Male character trope, these spin-offs are fair game.
Her introduction to the Mario spin-off games emphasizes the fact that all the other Toads in the entire species are male.
So you basically pick and choose whatever you want to talk about.
Studied extensively, both the Smurfette principle and the Ms. Male character tropes create scenarios that reinforce a false dichotomy, wherein male is associated with the norm, while female is associated with a deviation from the norm.
Only in those games. One of your favorite games of all times didn't suffer from either of these tropes.
In one of my favorite games of all time, Beyond Good and Evil,
if you can already find games you like, why are you going all over video game history to pick out the ones you want to criticize? Why don't you just go all over video game history and find the games you like?
everything we've discussed in this episode thus far has been related to visual design or narrative connection. But there's another way that the Ms. Male character trope can manifest itself, and that is through marketing and promotional materials.
Let's see where this goes.
A great illustration of this trend can be found in BioWare's highly regarded Mass Effect series. The games offer players a choice between a male or female version of the protagonist, Commander Shepard, each with a range of cosmetic, customizable options. The female option is well designed, and her overall narrative is nearly indistinguishable from her male counterparts, aside from some of the romance options.
If it is nearly indistinguishable from the male counterparts, why did you say this earlier?
Ms. Male characters typically aren't given their own distinctive identities and are prevented from being fully realized characters who exist on their own terms.
You just can't win with Anita.
However, if we take a step back from the game experience itself and look at the marketing campaigns for the trilogy, we see that the female variant of Shepard is practically non-existent. In mainstream advertising of the franchise, the male commander is used almost exclusively. His image is front and center on the box covers for all releases, including the special editions. He's the one featured in the TV commercials, teasers, trailers, web banners, street posters, and print ads, and his face appears on most of the magazine covers.
Good thing that was not an issue for Miss Pac-Man.
Ms. Pac-Man was not only one of the first playable female characters, but she also holds the distinction of being the original Ms. Male character in video games.
Honey, don't you know I'm more than Pac-Man with a bow?
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
Your flagship Ms. Male character was front and center for marketing and promotional materials.
Studied extensively.
On top of that, you do not market games. You are just a pop culture critic. These people have been doing this for years. They make hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, and you act almost as if they don't know what they are doing. You are backseat marketing.
All of this positions the male Commander Shepard as the default protagonist of the series.
Lara Croft is the default in her series. Bayonetta is the default in her series. But I will point out, these games tend to appeal to men more, so is it any surprise they make the male character the default when there is a choice? You are backseat marketing.
That is how BioWare is selling the Mass Effect experience. Nearly everything about the advertising campaign explicitly tells players that Commander Shepard is a man, and by extension associates the official storyline with the male version of the hero.
I want to replay what Anita just said BioWare did for their female character.
The games offer players a choice between a male or female version of the protagonist, Commander Shepard, each with a range of cosmetic, customizable options. The female option is well designed, and her overall narrative is nearly indistinguishable from her male counterparts, aside from some of the romance options.
BioWare went out of their way to give you what you wanted, better female representation. They did not have to do it, they chose to do it. And now you are raking them over the coals for not marketing it the way you want them to market it.
This marketing strategy contributes to the fact that only 18 to 20% of players choose the female option.
18 to 20%? In a game that is most likely played predominantly by men, that isn't actually that bad, considering that they would go out of their way to do that. And you are excluding other factors, such as the fact that a man would most likely choose the male character over the female.
Despite the fact that Jennifer Hale's voice acting is widely praised as being far superior.
You do realize that great voice acting wouldn't necessarily entice a man to choose the female? I'm not trying to belittle what she did, but you make it sound like we should be sympathetic more people did not play the female variant.
Still, the female version has a dedicated fan base who frequently refers to her as FemShep.
If she has a dedicated fan base, and the game was highly regarded,
A great illustration of this trend can be found in BioWare's highly regarded Mass Effect series.
then why do you make it sound like they did not know what they are doing? Has it ever occurred to you that you are the one who is clueless?
And although this is meant as an affectionate nickname, it does further highlight her designation as a Ms. Male character.
The players gave her that name. You said so yourself.
Still, the female version has a dedicated fan base who frequently refers to her as FemShep.
If players are giving her that name and they are fine with it, then you have the problem, not the developers or the players.
She is the one with the qualifier attached to her name. She is a female shepherd, whereas the male version simply gets to be shepherd.
There is nothing wrong with that. You are defining it as wrong. You are not a moral authority. You are just a pop culture critic. Most people don't care if she is FemShep, just like most people don't care if she is called Ms. Pac-Man.
During the advertising of Mass Effect 3, BioWare made a little more effort to include female shepherd with items like an alternative reversible slipcover for the game box,
So they did more to improve on things.
which features the male version by default.
And you are still complaining. That is all you do. Rake developers over the coals till they get it just right. Instead of encouraging them to continue down this road, you want to criticize them for not getting it just right in your eyes.
Which features the male version by default.
You are backseat marketing. You are not a marketing expert. You are just a pop culture critic. I would take their recommendations over yours any day of the week. They can make millions of dollars by producing high quality products. You raise 6 figures to produce garbage videos that are 2 years overdue, all based on lazy research.
Studied extensively, as well as a special web-only trailer, but these gestures feel like an afterthought or niche specialty marketing, and hardly what I would call a substantial or equitable inclusion.
They took a step in the right direction. That is what you want them to do, yet you are raking them over the coals for not doing what you wanted. You are making these videos all about what you want. Damn the developers if they make a great female character. Damn the developers if they make the male the default. Who cares if it is their time and money? Who cares if they've been doing this for years and making millions? Anita Sarkeesian has all the answers, even though all she's done is make 6 videos.
While Mass Effect's advertising strategy might not undermine the story or gameplay, it is a glaring example of how the Ms. Male character trope can be perpetuated by marketing departments unless careful consideration is given to how gender is represented when advertising games that do offer players a choice.
I think I've had all I can take of this backseat marketing nonsense.
Now, it's certainly true that in many cases, the games starring the female variant are better gaming experiences overall. And taken on their own, each individual example we've covered in this episode might seem relatively benign or trivial.
Then what was the point of the video? If the gaming experience could be better with the female variant and taken on their own, each example might seem trivial, what was the point?
But the reason this series focuses on tropes is because they help us recognize larger recurring patterns. Both the Ms. Male character and the Smurfette principle have been normalized in gaming and in mass media more broadly. So much so that the two tropes usually pass under the radar and are often reproduced unconsciously.
They are separate tropes you combined in one video. You did this to make it seem worse than it actually is. You did the same thing in Damsel in Distress Part 2. You added things to the Damsel in Distress that are not part of the trope itself. All you do is add something to it. You take something away from it to create a new narrative based on what you're missing.
Which is part of what makes the myths they perpetuate about women so powerful and insidious in our culture.
What myths? You said that these signifiers are not part of the trope itself.
Gendered signifiers are not mandatory for the Ms. Male character trope to be in effect.
And women are born with their own identities, so they are not Ms. Male characters by default.
The truth of the matter is that there's really no need to define women as derivative copies of men or to automatically resort to lazy, stereotypical, or limiting gendered signifiers when designing video game characters.
I find it odd that you, of all people, are calling others lazy.
Claire is a simple blue cube and one of the more memorable characters from the indie game Thomas Was Alone. We know she's female because of her name, her narrative, and the pronouns used during gameplay. Claire's gender presentation doesn't reduce her to her gender or separate her from the rest of the cast. Half of the playable characters in Towerfall are women, and the game is also notable for its color code inversion. The Last of the Order wears blue, while the Assassin Prince is decked out in pink. Indie games like Knit Underground, Scary Girl, It'll Do, and the iOS title Lily all have female characters who resist gendered stereotypes.
Then go play those games.
Each of these indie games avoids falling back on the Ms. Male character trope or relying on narrow, superficial visual markers as a stand-in for personality. The visual aesthetics of these female characters displays a range of gender expression and presentation using a variety of hairstyles, color choices, and accessories. Developers can also choose to give players the opportunity to get to know the personalities, interests, and struggles of their characters.
This is coming from someone who used to have more visual aesthetics and personality in her older videos. As far as all those other traits you just listed, many gamers do not care about that stuff. A lot of us just want to have fun playing games.
Even with minimal narrative or limited graphics, it is entirely possible to make games that feature dynamic women who exist on their own terms.
If I learned one thing from this video,
Honey, don't you know I'm more than Pac-Man with a bow?
I'm a Pac-Man freak.
and that concludes my review. If you like this video, I have a playlist tackling Anita Sarkeesian and her work, and encourage you to check it out. It also includes reviews of her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series.
I get a lot of support from people who really like my videos, and they've even been used as educational tools in classrooms. Educational tools.
I leave my audience with one question.